A humanitarian aid flotilla is approaching Gaza. We have Israel about to take action on this. Lucas, I know you've been following this more closely than most. Fill us in on what's going on here. So, this is a humanitarian aid uh, set of ships that are going to come deliver some relief to the people of Gaza. Is Israel going to attack these boats, like carrying humanitarian aid? What should we expect from this?
Well, these boats have already been attacked, both in Tunisia and 2 nights ago, they were attacked in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea by drones. We don't know who dispatched those drones, but one, they've already been attacked. Two, this flotilla is not the first of humanitarian flotillas that have been dispatched to Israel. And they go back all the way to 2010. The idea came in the wake of two boats that entered Gaza back in 2008. This came at a time when the world had expectations that the relationship between Israel and its Arab neighbors were going to change, and that relationship was going to change because of the election of Barack Obama. People thought that there were winds of change coming from the United States. Unfortunately, as we understand now, that change in leadership in the United States did not bring about um, any great changes in the American foreign policy, the American wars that were occurring in the Middle East. But this is sort of the idea behind the flotillas, um, and the flotillas, we, as you said, are humanitarian. I think that's important to note because these are civilian attempts to try to both bring recognition to things that are going on in the area, the things that are going on in Gaza. It's a way to establish something happening, a narrative to draw the attention to the press. The press has largely turned their heads and ignored these flotillas in the past, but here they're trying again, and the flotillas are growing in size. I think this one has 44, 46 boats, a number of boats, citizens from all around the world, many from the United States, many from Europe, and some stars, Greta Thunberg, uh, and others are aboard the ships. Now, a flotilla was launched several months ago, and that flotilla was boarded in international waters as it got close to the shores of Israel. And the the people who were aboard the ships were arrested. They were taken in. They were taken into Israel. They were given the option of pleading guilty and being put on a plane back to where they came from, or being thrown in jail. Some people took the route of jail. I'm not sure how long they languished in Israeli jails. I think they were all eventually released. I believe there were even Israeli citizens who were aboard the flotillas, Israeli citizens who were protesting the actions of their own government. Um, I'm not sure what happened to them, but I think it's important to bear in mind that that Israel transgressed international law by boarding the boats in international waters, and nobody said, or the large response around the world was to pay no attention to that transgression. Here, the boats come daring that to occur again. This time, they have escorts of militaries from Europe. The Spanish and Italian countries have dispatched military ships to accompany this flotilla. Turkey has also promised to give the flotilla naval military support, although I don't believe as of yet that they have dispatched any ships to support them. Um, There's also been a somewhat of a tide turn in Egypt. Egypt has, Egypt has a, I wouldn't say a complicated history with Israel. They have a combative um, history with Israel. There was a 6 Day war with Egypt in the past. That was laid to rest, or some of the tensions between those countries were laid to rest with the Camp David Accords back during Clinton's era. Egypt has openly defied those in the wake of Israel's many desecrations of their agreements, their ceasefires with their neighboring countries. And Egypt now has tanks along the southern edge of Israel. So the balance of power is shifting dramatically in Israel, and the approach of this flotilla might set off, might trigger a cascade of events. We'll see how Israel handles this.
So, I mean, there are tensions in Israel. We've been starting to see these clips get replayed of Charlie Kirk talking about the civil war that was brewing in Israel. Is this resurfacing at this point? Are we witnessing the birth of the civil war in Israel that's about to happen, or is that just recirculated clip?
The civil war that Charlie Kirk speaks of goes back, um, I mean, through the entire narrative of the history of Israel. There has been tension between um, those who those who seek the one state solution to get along with Palestinians, those who have contrived a narrative of a two-state solution while trying to deprive the native Palestinians of any land in which to create a state, have tried to drive them into Jordan and to Egypt and to the other Arab states. So this conflict goes back a long ways. At the time of the October 7th attack in 2023, it had come to a head, so to speak, and that was playing out politically, domestically, politically in Israel. There were many protests against Benjamin Netanyahu. There were 3 cases that had been brought against him with regards to charges of taking bribes and engaging in fraud and making preferential treatment towards some companies in Israel. And Benjamin Netanyahu's response to that was to try to pack the Supreme Court and to respond in some ways. We begin to see this in many other countries around the world. Brazil with Jair Bolsonaro, and Donald Trump here in the United States, let's throw in France with Marine Le Pen, and Romania and Georgescu. The political game, whenever one alternative to revolution is to turn to the judicial process, and that was occurring in Israel at the time of the October 7th attacks. Benjamin Netanyahu's response to the judicial attacks against him were to try to pack the Israeli Supreme Court. So I believe that's all been set aside in the wake of the war that Israel has been engaged in since those October 7th attacks. But yes, there was a diminishing amount of support, or maybe a polarizing. There were polarizing forces going on in Israel leading into this war.
So the clip was something that was said early on, and really it's just him discussing the situation that's been in Israel for quite some time. This isn't like some new revelation. This is just the internet latching on to something that was said is being rethought in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death.
Yeah, there's not much new here, but I think we also need to, I'm also beginning to hear people beginning to grapple with the amount of support on the ground. So if we start to peek beneath these facades of governments and the supposed support of the government and the picked narratives of governments, a one-state solution or a two-state solution, is Gaza Hamas? Who has the authority to govern? It's interesting to one. We saw an American diplomat, Tom Barrack, make statements with regards to America's support for Lebanon. And he said, I believe it was last week, he said that the United States gives arms to Lebanon to fight Hezbollah, not to fight Israel. He said we've got to be careful about the arms that we're giving to Lebanon because we don't want to use them against Israel. Well, that's not according to the broader narrative of American support for democracies and for the right of self-determination by various countries in the world. And there has been a narrative about Hamas, Hezbollah, and Sharqallah, the Muslim and Arab factions that have fought the state of Israel and the Jewish presence in Israel, or I would say maybe not the Jewish presence. That's the line of Israel, that this is about religion. They have said this is about the attacks and the apartheid system that exists in Israel with regards to the Palestinians, who are Arab and Muslim. And I think what we are beginning to grapple with is the extent of support for these supposed terrorist organizations. And that is to say, when you begin to realize that, over 70% of Palestine support the policies and the actions of Hamas, and the lines of the politicians that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and that gives them the authority to wage a war against that terrorist organization, and that Hezbollah in Lebanon is a terrorist organization, and that Inshallah in Yemen is a terrorist organization. But then you turn around and begin to look at the amount of support that they have broadly, publicly, that narrative begins to fall apart. And the United States and the West are finding themselves in a tricky position as these broadly supported alternate governments also begin to gain international support, and especially support for the other Arab countries in the region, like we saw a couple of weeks ago whenever the Pan-Arab Muslim Summit was held, and they begin to work more overtly against the attacks that Israel has been raining down on so many of these Arab countries.
I'm still a little surprised that the Iran-Israel conflict spun down as fast as it did. It seemed like Iran was biding its time for some other thing to happen, and nothing followed up from that. There wasn't any escalation. There was no following tensions. Didn't see any resumption of bombardment of Israel with hypersonic missiles. Are we still waiting for something to happen here, or did that actually get de-escalated?
We have found out since the ceasefire at the end of the 12 days of war or bombs, the quote-unquote 12-day war between Iran and Israel, we found out that Israel was down to 2 days, a 2-day supply of missiles with which to fight Iran. So one, they were desperate for an end to that war. Iran was using their older stores of missiles and hadn't really even dipped into their newer or their vast inventory of missiles with which to fight Israel. Israel, I believe, it was hoping. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what exactly the broader plan is for Israel. I don't think that they have a lot of options because, in the wake of trying to bomb, um, firing a missile into Qatar to hit the Hamas diplomats who were there for hostage negotiations, negotiations in Palestine. Um, the Arab nations have joined more tightly together in their fight against Israel. So Israel's, Israel, by playing dirty, is pushing their enemies to work more tightly together. Again, Egypt has defied the Camp David Accords and sent their military to the border of Israel and Egypt. Turkey has has begun to work more openly against Israel, and we can imagine that they're working desperately inside Syria. Remember that they overthrew Syria with the help of Israel. Um, and maybe there was some expectation of how Syria was to be divvied up between Israel and Turkey, but Turkey has not been bearing as deep an internal conflict, and also has more population, more reserves than Israel. So you can see them making a long play to take more control of Israel than was agreed upon. I'm sorry, Syria than was agreed upon, and maybe to also maybe also to turn coat against Israel as the Arab, as Israel's power fails in the region. They might be they might be lashing out, and I also look at the Israeli reliance on Cyprus and the history of Turkey, with regards to Cyprus. I could see them being wary of more foreign control on a territory that they've long had their eye on. So, and then to turn to Iran. Iran recently launched a ballistic missile. They say that this was successful. There has still the debate within Iran as to whether they should be building a nuclear weapon. Still, there's a lot of public support for Iran to build a nuclear weapon. The reticence for building a nuclear weapon comes from their religious leader, and their religious leader has said that one, it's against the Muslim faith to use a weapon of such massive destruction, and two, that if they were to build a nuclear weapon, it would be to fight their great foe Israel, and Israel such a small area that it would kill as many or more Muslim people as it would Israelis. And so they say, why should we be going down that path? Now, I have seen not the president, I believe the foreign minister. The foreign minister of Iran recently tweeted that if Israel thinks that I forget actually what the text of his tweet is.
Let's go back for a second. So you said that the reason that Iran is reticent to complete and use a nuclear weapon is because of the indiscriminate nature of the weapon itself, but because it would kill too many Muslims. Is that what the religious leader has said?
Sure. And it makes sense. I mean, Israel's a very small country, and exists within, is surrounded on three sides by Arab nations. Um, uh, Israel, on the other hand, whenever it's considering its long list of enemies, this they if they strike Iran or Riyadh or Qatar or Pakistan or any number of targets, that's a long ways away from them. They don't have to worry as much about the nuclear fallout and the winds that might be blowing from wherever they're firing that nuclear missile. I mean, I'm not sure that Israel didn't fire a nuclear missile into Syria to also test a micro nuke back in December of last year. Um, that's a whole nother discussion. But we certainly know that there have been radioactive readings and a mushroom cloud from a strike in, I believe it was Tartar, Syria in December, whenever Israel and Syria were working together to overthrow Syria. So we also recently saw Saudi Arabia working with Pakistan. Saudi Arabia has long financed the Pakistani nuclear weapons program. If you remember, that was a clandestine, not internationally approved nuclear weapons program, just like Israel's. I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but long story short, there was in the recent Arab Summit, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia signed a treaty or an agreement between them for mutual protection, and I imagine that has to do with Saudi Arabian concerns about Israel's use of nuclear weapons, and what they what targets in Saudi Arabia they might strike that are so much farther away from Israel. The sorry, I got off on a sidetrack here with the Pakistan.
I was going to remind you where we were before that. So we were talking about the one state, the Camp David Accords with Egypt, Turkey, kind of how Israel's enemies are amassing themselves on the border, and exactly what's going to happen here as this situation continues to develop.
Yeah, so Iran, Israel has or had had an advantage with the amount of missiles and air power that they had, or maybe not even air power, because they only had 2 bases, and those are not in operation. They're having to make their flights out of Cyprus now. I think that that Iran and the other Arab countries are thinking about the vulnerabilities of the Israeli Defense Force with regards to face-to-face operations, or face-to-face combat, and I can't help but wonder if in the event that the war escalates to open warfare between Iran and Israel in the near future, that that Iran and maybe with the with an alliance between the likes of Turkey and Egypt are not going to be not be sending troops into Israel. When I look at the casualties and the results of face-to-face combat, the inability to squash Hamas or Hezbollah in Lebanon, and forget not too that Israel has been has sent tanks of their IDF soldiers into Lebanon. It hasn't just been missiles fired into houses and to to supposed terrorist cells in Lebanon, when they have fought hand to hand, they've had they're not as adept at fighting hand to hand as they are in using drones, missiles, and cell phones and pagers, sort of deep intelligence tactics in their warfare. And then whenever you think about the population differences between the two, you have to wonder if Iran is going to continue to fire missiles from a long ways away, or if they are going to strike while they see Israel as being weak and also exhausted from fighting in a war for so long. And then again, we have the flotilla that is approaching from the sea, the supposed humanitarian flotilla. Whenever you see that Israel's political response to these flotillas is to engage in forceful tactics rather than staging some sort of a charade, of bringing Palestinians to the beach, bringing wounded Palestinians, and saying, yes, you're here for humanitarian assistance. We're going to take this food back, and you have these ships here. You can bring some of these wounded Palestinians to seek medical care back where you're from. Load them up on the ships, and I'm going to give you a job to do to get out of here. And let's have the media take pictures and see how much that we care for Palestinians and how much we're actually concerned about the terrorist cells that exist within them. That's not the place that they're in. They are in a place of desperation, and using a hammer to hit anything that they see in sight. And if there is a very a public response of force, if they openly attack this flotilla, they're going to lose support around the world that is already crumbling. And here in the United States, we have the last maybe the last vanguard of support for Israel that exists. And people in the United States are beginning to realize and to think about this narrative of terrorists that exist, and what sort of responses what sort of responses should be appropriate with regards to ferreting out terrorist cells, and what the difference might be towards attacking civilians. And we know that Israel has been very indiscriminate since October 7th, in maintaining this line of we're attacking terrorists. They have openly declared that they wish to kill, to remove all the Palestinians from within Israel as possible. And meanwhile, as they show their hand with regards towards those hostilities, they've also shown their hands with regards to eyes on extending their territory outside the existing borders of Israel too, as part of this supposed Greater Israel project. And this is part of their attacks on Lebanon, on Qatar, and this is also what has been a driving force in bringing the Arab nations closer together to work against Israel's aggressions.
So if we're kind of wrapping up our thoughts on what might happen with this flotilla, there have been flotillas. This one has been attacked. It's getting close. I mean, what do you expect to see? Do you think that they're just going to try and shoot these guys out of the water, and this is going to completely falter? And when you said it's supposed, like, do you think that there's actually some sort of a military presence hidden within the flotilla?
Well, the flotilla this time the flotilla has support from, again, Spain and Italy, and supposedly, Erdogan with Turkey said that he would that the Turkish military, the Turkish Navy, would support the flotilla. They haven't sent any ships yet. But but now that we see, in 2010 when the flotilla was dispatched, or when the flotilla was sailing to Israel, um, uh, the Obama White House said that they didn't care if these these nut job activists were killed or not, and so they were communicating to the Americans as part of the flotilla that, you're working against American policy, and we're not going to do anything for you. I don't think that governments, maybe the United States government, as we see senators signing letters to support the flotilla, and we see governments in Europe turning to support. I don't know if once one country begins to look and pay attention, others are forced into a position of at least making, at least not looking the other way. So I don't think that, if Israel does try to attack the flotilla, I don't think they're going to have a lot of success. Maybe they wait until the flotilla enters into their domestic waters and they try to arrest everyone again. We'll see what happens. But you know, I mentioned also, or you mentioned, the two-state versus a one-state solution. We've also seen a wave of support in Europe, of countries that are beginning to recognize, the Palestinian state, and this goes back to this idea of the two-state solution. I'm not sure what chances there is in the future for a two-state solution to work, and I say that because as we begin to see, Israel attacking the sovereign states around them, and they've been doing so for quite some time. Those states are not going to. Um, uh, uh, it's going to be hard to work with your neighbors after you've attacked them openly, and separating, the Palestinians or the Arabs within the state of Israel, and saying, oh, there is some natural tension that exists, and we're going to have geographical boundaries that exist between these people at such close proximities. I don't think that works. So I think that in the future, what we're going to see is a one-state solution. But then, whenever I think about our ideas of democracy and of self determination, in the background of who is going to have a voice when it comes to that political table. One, I don't think, the narrative for the longest time, and until the last couple of years, was that Israel was not a Jewish state, and that was the official narrative about Israel. Well, the world, or the politicians or the governments of the world may have bought that line, but it wasn't the reality. And we have seen, as, the October 7th conflict, or in the wake of October 7th, that, Israel has openly declared that not only is it a Jewish state, but it's a Zionist state. Um, that the again, I don't know how democratically that works out in the future. If the identity of a state is of a democratic state, is that only, only some of the people who reside within its boundaries, um, get to reap the benefits of that state, then, I don't think there's a future for it. So, as the countries of Europe recognize a two-state solution, I I think that Israel has already played that card, and that's not in the possible futures of the area. So I think that we see a one-state solution in the future, but it's going to look more like Palestine, and a traditional Arab country of the region, and not a um, Zionist state.
Well, we're certainly keeping a close eye on it, and I think that's all the time we've got today. And we'll see you next time on FOMO.